Cynthia Jane Anderson, age 20, worked as a legal secretary at the law offices of James Rabbit and Jay Feldstein in Toledo, Ohio in 1981. On August 4th of that year, she was last seen at the business. When her employers arrived at work, they noticed that the radio was turned on and their desks were ready for the day. Unclaimed mail had been placed on the front door handle. A romance novel that Anderson was reading was open on her desk. Anderson was nowhere else in the building. Although her purse and car keys were missing, her vehicle was still locked in the parking lot outside the office. It was unusual for Anderson not to leave a note on the door when stepping out during work hours. She left a significant amount of money in her bank account, and her social security number has not been used since her disappearance. Prior to her vanishing, Anderson received suspicious phone calls at work that seemed to distress her. Her family reported that she also had recurring nightmares about being attacked by a man. In response to her concerns, Anderson's employers installed an emergency buzzer at her desk. They also kept the office doors locked at all times. Several suspects have been considered in Anderson's disappearance. None have been officially ruled out by investigators. Anthony and Nathaniel Cook, two brothers convicted of multiple murders in Ohio during the 1980s, deny any involvement in Anderson's case. Another convicted murderer currently incarcerated in Ohio is believed to have had possible involvement in her disappearance, but no concrete connection has been established. The individual has never been publicly identified. Convicted drug dealer Jose Rodriguez Jr. and his attorney Richard Neller are also considered suspects. Neller worked at Anderson's law firm in 1981. Authorities theorize that she may have overheard conversations related to drug deals between Neller and Rodriguez. Investigators speculate that this information could have led to her possible abduction and/or murder. These claims remain unproven. During Rodriguez's trial in 1995, an informant testified that Rodriguez confessed to killing Anderson, but the testimony was deemed unreliable. Both Rodriguez and Neller are currently in prison for drug convictions. No one has been charged in connection with Anderson's disappearance. George Sauter, born Giorgio Sadu in Sardinia, Italy in 1895, immigrated to the United States at age 13 with his brother. Sauter found work in Pennsylvania and later became a truck driver in West Virginia. He started his own trucking company, married Jenny Cipriani, and settled near Fayetteville. They had 10 children. George's business thrived, making them a respected middle-class family. However, conflicts arose due to George's outspoken opposition to Mussolini. Their youngest child, Sylvia, was born in 1942. By then, their second oldest son, Joe, had left home to serve in the military during World War II. In the following year, Mussolini was deposed and executed. George's criticism of the late dictator created some animosity in the community. In October 1945, a life insurance salesman who visited their home and was turned away issued a warning to George. He ominously stated that their house would go up in flames and their children would be harmed. Another visitor, who claimed to be looking for work, took the opportunity to go around to the back of the house and warned George that a pair of fuse boxes would cause his fire someday. This puzzled George because he had recently rewired the house when they installed an electric stove. The local electric company assured him that everything was safe. In the weeks leading up to Christmas that year, George's older sons noticed a strange car parked along the main highway in town. The occupants of the car would watch the younger Sauter children as they returned home from school. On Christmas Eve in 1945, Betty and her 4 siblings, Maurice, Martha, Louise, and Jenny, asked their parents if they could stay up and play with their Christmas toys after the rest of the family went to bed. They promised to complete their chores before going to sleep. The parents agreed to let them stay up. After midnight, the mother, Jenny, received a phone call from an unknown woman who asked to speak to someone Jenny did not know. The caller laughed and hung up, leading Jenny to believe it was a prank call. Before going back to sleep, Jenny noticed that the lights were on, the shades were up, and the doors were unlocked in their home. Later that night, Jenny was awakened by a noise on the roof. At 1:30 a.m., she realized their house was on fire and called out to her husband and children to get out. 2 of the children made it outside, but Maurice, Martha, Louise, Jenny, and Betty were missing. George attempted to find a ladder to reach the children's bedroom, but it disappeared. The ladder was later found down an embankment away from the house. The Sodder house burned down in less than 45 minutes. The fire department initially blamed faulty wiring as the cause. Some reports mention that no trace of the missing children's remains were found in the ashes. Others claim to have discovered bone fragments and possible human organs. One analyzed fragment turned out to be a beef liver. A coroner's journey declared that the missing Sodder children had died in the fire. Despite the fire marshal's advice, George plowed over the remains of their home and planted flowers in memory of their lost children. Within months, George and Jenny became convinced that their children had been kidnapped and the fire set intentionally to cover up the crime. The house's telephone line had been cut before or after the fire. Witnesses reported seeing the children in the area shortly after the fire. The Sodders tried to reopen the case, but the police refused to investigate for many years. They believed no crime had occurred. In 1949, George and others excavated the site of the former home in search of the children's remains. They found 4 pieces of vertebrae and 2 small bones, possibly from a child's hand. A pathologist involved in the search noted the unusual scarcity of remains, considering the quick burning nature of the fire. The pathologist believed the bones belonged to a 14 to 15-year-old, matching Maurice's age. However, George doubted they belonged to his son due to their location in the house's floor plan. Another analysis suggested the bones belonged to a 16 to 22-year-old individual. Strangely, the bones showed no signs of fire damage. There was speculation that they had been planted from a nearby cemetery, but there's no evidence to support this theory. In 1968, George and Jenny received a photograph in the mail of a young man in his mid-20s. It was labeled Louis Soddard with the words, "I love brother Frankie," "Ill boys," and A90132 or possibly A90135 written on the back. The Sodders believed it was a picture of their son Louis as an adult, but they cannot verify this. The man in the photo remains unidentified. It's unclear who sent the picture and why. George and Jenny searched for their children for the rest of their lives, even posting a billboard offering a reward for their safe return. George passed away in 1969, Jenny in 1989. Some speculate that the missing children perished in the fire. The parents cannot accept the loss. Some believe the children were abducted and possibly taken to Italy. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold came from a wealthy and prominent family in New York City in 1910. Her father was a successful perfume importer, and their social standing was high. Arnold graduated from Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania, spoke multiple languages, and aspired to be a writer. She lived with her family in a mansion on East 79th Street in Manhattan. On December 12th, Arnold left her home in the morning, telling her mother she was going shopping for a new evening gown. She chose to go alone, walked south on Fifth Avenue. She bought chocolates at a candy store and a book at Brentano's bookstore, where she had a brief conversation with a friend. Arnold mentioned that she was going for a walk in Central Park, but failed to meet her mother for lunch at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Arnold was not heard from again. Her family assumed she was staying with a friend, didn't worry until she didn't come home after the second night. They hesitated to contact the police out of fear of negative publicity. Instead, they hired private investigators. Despite extensive searches and publicity, no evidence of Arnold's whereabouts was found. Her father believed she had been murdered and disposed of in a reservoir in Central Park, but there was no proof to support his theory. Arnold's disappearance received widespread attention, with her photograph published in newspapers across the United States and Europe. Still, there were no significant leads. During the investigation, it was discovered that Arnold had rented a secret post office box to keep her rejected manuscripts hidden from her family. Authorities also learned that she had begun secretly dating George C. Griscom Jr., a wealthy engineer from Pittsburgh. They spent a week together before her disappearance. Arnold pawned jewelry after their rendezvous. Griscom was in Italy during Arnold's disappearance. He cooperated in the search for her. He denied any involvement and provided her family with a letter she had written earlier in the year, hinting at her depression after a rejection from a magazine. While theories of Arnold staging her disappearance or taking her own life emerged, there was never any conclusive evidence to support these claims. Some speculate that she may have been pregnant and died from a botched abortion, but no medical facilities in New York City had records of her admission. The investigation into Arnold's disappearance is no longer active due to the passage of time. The case remains unsolved.